It's the whole story that weaves the tapestry of who we are. Very typical mid-20th century childhood. We taught ourselves to play. If you apply yourself, you could become a pioneering leader in the science of tennis performance. It changed everything about me. I wrote the book to people that ever felt they weren't good enough or people that ever felt they needed to please someone.
Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Diane. It's great to be with you.
Where did your story truly begin?
Very typical mid-20th century childhood, except that both parents worked, which was kind of unusual back in that day. Most of my family were farmers. We lived in a very small community. My dad was a public school teacher. My mom was a bookkeeper. My sister's 10 years older than I. So basically, she kind of raised me. And we spent a lot of time at the farms with my grandparents, uncles. Then things went off a little bit of a tangent. My father had 21 beagles, and he ran the dogs in what was called field trials, where you don't shoot the rabbit, but they release a rabbit, and then they time how quickly the beagle can basically corral the rabbit back toward the hunter. And he had one national champion. Dad's kennel was Shady Dale Kennels, and he named the dog after President Eisenhower's nickname, so it was Shady Dale Ike. When I was 8 years old, my dad took another job in a larger city of Alton, Illinois, and we moved, so Dad had to get rid of all the beagles. And I watched my dad transfer, this is in the 50s, $900 for one dog. It was then that I realized that there could be a price on almost everything. So that was my first lesson in entrepreneurship. I loved the outdoors, and I was just an adventurer. I would just create my own adventures. But there were always three of us, me, myself, and I, and we had a lot of fun. I had a childlike curiosity from the beginning, and that, I think, is really how everything started.
What did you learn in those young years?
You learned autonomy very quickly. Here I am, I'm 9 years old. I'm carrying a weapon in the woods. I mean, I'm hunting and target practicing. And you learn when you're carrying a weapon is you really understand the self-reliance and the self-confidence and the quiet, unassuming feeling. I just loved nature. I got to a point I carried binoculars with me. I loved bird watching, identifying new birds. And then I got involved in scouting, and I was on a fast track. What really flipped things upside down was when I was 6 years old, and it was an event that really changed the course of my life. I disobeyed my father in a really bad way. We were up in one of the farms, and my parents had this little cabin they called a clubhouse, and Dad called me. I was playing, and he said, let's go. He wanted to look at the fence in the back part of the property. So we drove about a quarter of a mile away. I still see it happening to this moment. And he pulls over into a field, and he says, wait here for me. I'm waiting, and I get out, and I'm calling for him. Hey, Dad. And I've never heard from him. I just walked back to the clubhouse. He finds me and pulls me out. I got the beating of my life, Diana. The bruising was gone in a few weeks, but the emotional scars I carried for decades. Even as a 6-year-old, instead of cowering, I said, I'll show you. I got into scouting. I became an Eagle Scout at 13, and I intentionally received my Eagle the week before I turned 14 to just show my dad that it could be done. And what I got that evening after the award was, well, not many people have done that. Not a congratulations, just not many people have done that. And I said, okay, watch me. And then I was a baseball player. Dad never came to any of the events. Mom took me to everything. And then they made me take tennis lessons when I was 11 years old at the YWCA, Diana. And, this is a time when all my cousins, you either played football or baseball. And they said, you can play tennis your whole life. You can't play baseball. I didn't know how prophetic that was. I didn't really like tennis, but I was okay at it. And then I met this guy by the name of Bill Wicks, and he invited me to play. We played a couple of times. He said, let's go play a tournament. And I'm going, I don't even know how to score, dude. He says, I'll teach you on the way there. So his parents drove us, and I actually won a round. And I said, I might be able to be pretty good at this. That was the beginning of Bill and I just becoming total tennis geeks. We would shovel snow off the courts in Alton, Illinois. We'd have 2 cans of tennis balls, and we'd shovel the snow off the courts, play. When the balls got too cold to bounce, we'd replace the balls. But we taught ourselves to play. I never had a lesson other than that YWCA. And then I walked on and made the team at the University of Illinois, and Bill walked on and made the team at the University of Miami. Here we were 2 kind of blokes from Southern Illinois, and here they are playing for big-time universities.
I remember taking tennis lessons at Rock Springs Park.
That's where I was.
At the Y, where did you play tennis?
There used to be tennis courts at SIU campus just after it was Shirtlift. So the beauty of that was I could walk from our home.
Do you remember when achievement became a shield for you rather than a goal?
Ooh, when I became aware of it, I don't know when that happened. It was more a way of life for me. For me, it was like making the team at the University of Illinois. I didn't get a scholarship offer there. I was recruited by very small schools, and that was minimal. And here I am going to try to play for a Big Ten school. And Dad said that if I've got to pay for your education, you got to get a good degree. So that's why I went into agriculture. So I made the team, but I got my undergraduate degree in wildlife biology, and I couldn't get a job. So I started grad school in population genetics. I was so unhappy. My brother-in-law had gotten his doctorate in the same field. My dad was pretty impressed at that. I called Ruth Ann, my sister, and she said, why don't you go talk to the people in physical education? And I said, well, Dad will kill me. And she said, who cares? You don't even know what you don't know yet. And the department head accepted an appointment to meet with me. And I knew it was the right decision within seconds. His name was Dr. Rollin Wright. And he said, well, why don't I admit you to the master's program? You could do anything. You could coach, you could do research. Why don't you get in the field and see what makes sense for you? He said, how does that sound? I said, fine, but I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. He said, why don't I waive your tuition and fees, and I need somebody to teach my tennis classes, and I'll give you a small stipend. How does that sound? And I went, are you kidding me? And called Dad that night. Sure enough, he cut me off. That was the beginning of me just being adventurous. I made this career jump and me just like overnight. And then I had to take cadaver anatomy. That was off-putting the first time I saw a dead body. Kinesiology and exercise physiology, the three hardest courses, but I fell in love with it and I got straight A's. Wow. And at the end of that semester, Dr. Charles Dillman, who became a dear friend and mentor, he said 17 words to me. If you apply yourself, you could become a pioneering leader in the science of tennis performance. And that was all it took. There was no career. There was no pathway, but I just said, okay, this is it. That's what I'm going to do. And then I said, but if I do this, if it's never been done before, everything I do has to be the highest quality possible. I cannot shortcut. Chuck became the founding director of sports science for the U.S. Olympic Training Center. He was my master's thesis advisor. Then when I left there, he encouraged me to go on and get a PhD. And one of his colleagues, Dr. Terry Ward, was at Florida State University, and Terry accepted me into the program. He could direct my research. I had another person become the dissertation advisor, and that became Dr. Robert Singer. So now I have a world leader in sports psychology overseeing my doctoral work in biomechanics and physiology. So I get this multidimensional approach to human performance. I got my doctorate, and I get a phone call in the spring from Chuck Dillman again. The tennis coaching job at Illinois is opening up. Would you like to apply? I'm going, well, where does that line start? Are you kidding? I'm 25 years old. Yes. So I applied, they flew me in, and I got the job as the men's tennis coach, one of the youngest NCAA coaches in the country at the time. Now I got to finish my dissertation, though. So I finished my dissertation the first year I was back at Illinois coaching, my doctorate in 78. Then I coached for 4 years. In 76, I gave 2 papers at the Olympic Scientific Congress. So I'm constantly stepping out of my comfort zone. Bob Singer and I drove from Tallahassee to Quebec City, and I presented 2 papers at the Olympic Scientific Congress. So I'm sending feelers out by mail and phone calls to tennis coaching organizations. And then in the late 70s, I'm invited to speak. Now I've got all these high-speed films of tennis research that I'm doing. And gradually people are starting to understand, hey, this could be really innovative. Now I start having physicians contact me. And then in 79, I go to Chicago to the amphitheater and I film Chris Evert and Billie Jean King and Margaret Court and Wendy Turnbull. And then 2 years later in 81, I go to Madison Square Garden to get all of the men at the Masters in tennis. I mean, so I'm getting all these records on high-speed film of the greatest tennis players in the world and how they perform so that I can do coaching education. Now it catches on. So I resigned from coaching the men's team because now I'm starting to work with players on the tour. Then in the mid-'80s, I was invited to be part of the sports medicine committee of the U.S. Tennis Association. But 4 years later, we decided to create a sports science committee that would involve sports medicine, but would involve biomechanics and nutrition and psychology and motor learning. And then I became the founding chairman of the sports science committee for the United States Tennis Association. Now I'm flying all over the world even more, doing coaching education. Then I get involved in physiology and fitness training and movement training. And then Chuck Dillman was the founding director of sports science for the U.S. Olympic Training Center. And I became a research associate with Chuck for 10 years. I did research with him. So I worked with 26 Olympic sports. But it's like dominoes.
When did you first realize that you were influencing the field of tennis?
I think it was when I started doing the coaching education People weren't scratching their heads like I was some egghead, even though that's what Arthur Ashe's nickname for me was. I was one of Arthur's eggheads. But it wasn't some hocus pocus theory. It was really applied science that could help players and coaches. And I think that was when the aha moment that I could be onto something and really doing something significant in coaching education and player development.
How did tennis get you into the human performance field?
Tennis was a vehicle. For example, in 82, a doctor that I'd been working with invited me to go to Washington, D.C. I'm speaking, it's called the Cherry Blossom Sports Medicine Festival. So I'm working with all these docs and I show the high-speed films. Now, what I'm doing with them is prevention of injury. How should technique occur to prevent injury and keep it safe for training? After the talk, this very tall gentleman stops me and he says, "Can I just ask you a question?" I said, "Sure. Can you do this in baseball?" And I went, "Well, I'm sure, but what are you interested in doing?" And he said, "I'm really concerned about the head first versus the feet first slide." And I said, "Who are you, by the way?" "My name is Richard Corzot. I'm the team physician for the Chicago White Sox. And I'm living in Champaign." And I'm going, "Yeah, it can be done." So I drive up to Comiskey Park the next week and I meet Dave Nelson, who became a lifelong friend. He was the first base coach. Now think about this. This is in the 80s. This is way before video today. So Davey was really receptive and we got great film footage. That ended up being a journal article. I published that in the American Journal of Sports Medicine. The head first versus the feet first slide from the Chicago White Sox. Tennis was the vehicle that started it all for me. But the word quality was so key because if I would have just shortcut up front, it would have never happened. I had to do really quality work. Think about this. You're using film. This isn't video. So you got one shot at this stuff. You overexpose the film or underexpose it, you've got nothing. I had to make sure that everything I did was the highest quality possible. And I think that is really important for someone who wants to follow in my footsteps. Don't try shortcuts. Always do quality work. And make sure you ask quality questions. Thomas Edison had one of the greatest quotes, and I think it fits my life pretty well. He said, "I had 10,000 types of the experiment that were unsuccessful, but I never failed, not once. What I learned was that there were 10,000 ways that it didn't work." Once. And I think that's kind of how my life's been. Did I make mistakes? Yes. Did I screw up some projects? Yes. But I never beat myself up because of it. I always said to myself, you can do better. You just do a better job next time. Just don't let it happen again. And that came from sport. You're going to make mistakes. Just don't do the same mistake again.
Looking back, what accomplishments from that early period of your life looks different to you now?
Well, making the team at Illinois, as I look back on it now, I don't think that would happen in today's world. This past fall, I received the Distinguished Alumni Award from the college. I can be in the room right now in my mind, and I'm meeting with the tennis coach at Illinois, my senior in high school, and I'm talking him into letting me try out. And the only reason he let me try out is that I had a really good career in high school. I had a fairly good ranking in the St. Louis metropolitan area, but he wasn't optimistic. He said, "But I'll let you try out. So you're telling me there's a chance?" I was kind of like that my whole life.
Now, how long did this go on for you with this research and your filming with the White Sox?
Oh, gosh. Well, I did it the whole time I was at Illinois. I was tenured. I had a joint appointment in bioengineering, and I received tenure in 1985. And in 1987, I was offered the director of player development job for the Harry Hopman Saddlebrook International Tennis Program in Tampa, Florida. So I quit. I gave up tenure, and my dad turns over in his grave every time I make that statement. May have done it for the wrong reasons, but it was the right move. That was probably then that I actually stopped taking high-speed films because I didn't have the camera anymore. But video technology was coming into play. So I was able to do video analysis. When I did Madison Square Garden, I'll never forget, I got the films developed. And I could only shoot at 100 frames a second. I couldn't shoot really high speed. But at 100 frames a second, I'm watching the films and I'm seeing the lights in the background go on and off. And I realized there's 60 cycle lights. It was catching things that the human eye can't perceive.
Did you feel like you were on a successful track?
I didn't know what success was. In 1987, I became a master professional in what was called the U.S. Professional Tennis Association, and then I was named the National Teaching Pro of the Year. I'd already been the founding chairman of the Sports Science Committee for the U.S. Tennis Association. I'm feeling like I'm making a difference, but there was that constant, Dad was just still always in the background. And I think at the end of the day, I look back on my life now and I was just a young man looking for love from his father. If I would have gotten that redemption from him, I don't know if I would have pursued it as much as I did, but I was hell bent on showing him that I could do stuff he didn't think I could do.
What I've often heard is if you don't love yourself, how can anybody else love you?
Yeah, if someone would have said that to me as a young man, I would have said, you're smoking something. That's not even in my sweet spot right now. Do I love myself? Of course I do. The theme song of my life was looking for love in all the wrong places. You know, I found my faith and that helped me a lot. I had to hit rock bottom before I really understood. So what happened was in 1996, I'd had surgery on both knees and both shoulders. We'd moved the business from Tampa to Orlando. It was in 95. And I was cleaning the eaves because there was a hurricane coming. I stepped off the ladder and kind of twisted my knee. I didn't think anything of it. I was in extreme pain. And my wife took me to the emergency room and they aspirated a whole lot of blood and fluid off my knee. My knee was hemorrhaging because of the arthritis. So the doctor said, well, we've got to let this settle down. So no more tennis, no running. 4 months later, I was in pretty good shape. I've been traveling, and so I fly through Miami, and I'm in the Miami terminal. And there's a real small escalator that used to go down to what was called the American Eagle terminal. My foot slipped on the escalator step, and I twisted my knee again, same one. And by the time the plane landed in Marathon, Florida, an ambulance had to come to the plane to take me to the hospital direct. I couldn't even walk off the plane. The knee had exploded again. Go back to Orlando, and the physician says, we need to clean your knee out. And sure enough, 3 days later, I got to go to Chicago. I'm not going to take it easy, right? I go there. Well, the sutures broke in the studio. And when I got back to Orlando a few days later, I was in immense pain. The orthopedic surgeon came to my house and saw the knee and he said, oh my gosh, you've got an infection. We've got to admit you to the hospital. So now the struggle is it's a strain of Staph aureus that they could not find an antibiotic for. I was in the hospital for 15 days. Now, don't get me wrong. I got phone calls, but I only had one person outside my family come to visit me. And I just said, what the hell? So I didn't blame anybody else. I blame myself. Who have I become? I'm traveling all over the world. I'm developing this reputation, but I'm not pouring energy into other people. And I said, this has to stop. And it was then that I got on a path toward my faith. That was the beginning of a transformation for me. That was the rock bottom. That was when I realized the bill was being paid now.
About what time was that?
It was winter of 96. I was 45.
That's scary when nobody comes to visit you.
And again, I want to give people a fair shake. I got phone calls, but the visits didn't happen. I just said, this has got to stop. The beauty of that is I was here in Florida a year and a half ago, and I got really dizzy one night. I called my neighbor that I just met recently. Now, you understand, I'd only been here for 3 months, but I'd volunteered to coach the ladies' league team, and I was volunteering. I didn't know anybody when I moved here, but I'm really trying to be actively involved. And in 3 months, I have to go to the ER, and I'm admitted to the hospital. And in that 2 or 3 days, I had like 6, 7, 8 people visiting me. My life transformation in that 25 years had gone from nobody to being surrounded.
What was the hardest part about you that you had to face when you were writing the book?
The hardest part was to face that I was just a man trying to find love from his dad, and that dad and I were still really strained. He and I had a confrontation in the late 90s, and that led to he and I at least some sort of reconciliation during the last 10 years of his life. And that was a big deal. Forgiving myself and then forgiving my dad and having a better relationship with him.
Do you think that part of the reason that you were able to have a better relationship with him is your maturity and his maturity as well?
We both had to realize we were a little bit full of ourselves, and we had to realize what reality was. Mine came from the mentors that I had, Chuck Dillman, Bob Singer. They humbled me more than a few times. I was on this really large speaking circuit in the late 90s. I created a concept called the anti-diet, had a whole kit that I sold on stage, and I was traveling the world. I was in St. Louis. Dad came to one tennis event my entire life. So here I am in what was then called Kiel Auditorium, sold out, 20,000 people. I'm following the legendary broadcaster Paul Harvey, and I'm preceding Mikhail Gorbachev from the former Soviet Union. And I walked on stage in St. Louis in front of 20,000, and I told everybody there I'm a hometown guy. This is where I grew up, and that my mom and dad were in the audience today. I got a standing ovation, and I walked up. We took a really good picture, mom and dad and I looked up at dad after the photo, and I said, so what'd you think? And his exact words were, well, you're pretty good, but Paul Harvey was by far the best speaker of the whole day. It was then that I realized I would never please him. And I was at the house that night, and I confronted Dad. I said, you've never even said the words, I love you. I'm in my mid-40s, and I've never heard you say that. He says, well, you know how I feel. I said, no, I don't. Tell me. I made him say the words. And after that, he was able to say it often. In fact, the last 10 years of his life, he would say, love you, I love you, son, before I would even say it. But that confrontation that day was a big one. And that was the beginning of reconciliation, is me realizing to stop pleasing him. Stop it. Just stop it. And that was huge. And that was huge on his part to realize that he could say the words, I love you, and really express himself and how he meant it. And that all happened in a period of about 6 hours.
How can somebody recognize when ambition becomes unhealthy?
That's a great question. I think you always have to calibrate yourself and what you're doing with this question. What matters most to me right now? Because if you have a spouse or a partner or you have kids, what matters most to you right now very often might not be that I got to take this phone call at 2:00. As I look back on my life, could I have said no to some of those times getting on an airplane? Of course I could have. But you see, I didn't think I could. I thought I had to do them because this is who I am. Who am I? I'm Jack Groppel. I get on airplanes. I go speak. You're marrying me? Well, you know what you're getting into. Honestly, that's kind of my attitude. And I hate that about who I was.
Do you say no now?
Oh, my son laughs at me. I'll turn down huge amounts of money. I just won't even do it. Now, if I can make it work, I'll travel and speak. And if it makes sense, I'll do that. I was doing 2 or 3 of those a week. I was in different cities. I woke up 3 times in my career. I didn't know what city I was in. Do you have any idea how disarming that is? You run to the window thinking, I know the skyline, and then you don't. And then you remember that your assistant put your itinerary in your briefcase and pull your itinerary out and find out where you are. That happened 3 times to me, but it wasn't. It was just doing too much, too fast, too soon, constantly. I was just go, go, go.
Well, at least you've learned to say no and
to
pace yourself.
For sure.
It sounds like you've changed your priorities.
My friends are my priority right now. My son is absolutely my priority. And my stepson and my nephews, my sister, they're my priorities now. 100%. You may not be me. You may not have done the things that I've done. You can learn from my example of how you can do things better.
Why did you write your story?
I've had people for years because it's such a unique path that I've been on. It's not that I hadn't thought about it. So the why of the story has always been there. But it was on Kilimanjaro when my son was 12 and I had my artificial knees, and I just went, this mountain is what my life has been. It's been exhilarating at times. It's been hell at times. It's been incredible fun at times. It's been excruciating at times. And I said, so if I write my story, I have to tell the whole story, not just all the fun, cool stories. I have to talk about what happened as a child. Why did I get on this path? What happened in my relationships? So this book is the whole story. So I wrote the book initially because to answer people saying, why don't you tell your story?
Why did you publish it?
To people that ever felt they weren't good enough or people that ever felt they needed to please someone. That's why I published the book. I was one of the best at people pleasing.
What did your marriages teach you about connection and accountability and self-awareness?
Well, unfortunately, I was a slow learner. They taught me a lot. First one, I ran into the arms of another one. Second one, I don't talk about that one a lot because I was just never there. The energy just wasn't there from me, not from them. I take full responsibility. What I learned from the marriages together was that if I'm going to be in a relationship, which I really feel that now I've learned, it's about giving energy to other people. I was never really very good at that. And I think that's what I learned, is not just being in a relationship for relationship's sake, but giving energy to another person.
So you don't have to be in a relationship with a person of the opposite sex, but a person in your life, like your son and your sister and your family and your friends. It sounds like you give a lot to your friends as well.
I do now. My friends and my family come absolutely first in everything. That's why literally I'll turn down engagements.
Has your sister seen changes in you?
Her kids have. After my last divorce, I've not missed a Thanksgiving with them.
What can others learn from your experience?
Always calibrate what matters most to you. I'm a man who wants to be a loving father, brother, uncle, cousin, friend, and leader. But the last is leader.
I see there was a shift in your life where everything probably started to change. And that was your adoption of your son. Why did you choose to adopt from China?
My wife, my third wife at the time, we had gone to her grandmother's funeral, and her first cousin shows up with his family's adopted daughter from China. And we just kind of looked at each other and went, huh. And we prayed about it. And about 6 or 7 months later, we decided to try the process. A year and a half later, we got our login date, which means you're basically pregnant. Like 6 months after that, we get a phone call that China had just changed the rules and the parents can't be over 55. Well, I was 55. And they said, oh, but you've already got your login date. So the joke in my family is that we were grandfathered in. and then we get another call. It's March of 2008, a year later. We're still waiting. And they said, China's changed everything, and you're probably going to be another 2 years before back. She said, well, you could get in the waiting child list. And I said, yeah, we want to look at the waiting child list. Sure enough, we get a picture of this little boy by the name of Shen, who was in the orphanage in Shenzhen City, and we fell in love with him. We did a letter of intent, and we got accepted. And in August of 2008, we were on a family vacation at SeaWorld in San Antonio, and my wife and her son, my stepson, had gone on a ride, and I got a call from the agency that we had to be in China on September the 8th to get our son, 1 month later. Well, my wife had injured her ankle. She had to have surgery, so she couldn't go. So I went by myself. And this is where God has a sense of humor, because I'm going to send this man that has struggled in relationships his whole life, and I'm going to send him to China by himself, and they're going to put a screaming 4-year-old in his arms. And in 2 weeks, where all they've got is tone of voice, facial expression, and touch, I'm going to teach them to love each other. And it was the most profound 2 weeks of my life.
How much English did he speak?
None. And I knew no Mandarin. See, this is part of the sense of humor of God. The funny part about this is they taught us phrases, and one phrase they taught me, they said that you have to learn, because this is a toddler. He's going to get a little rambunctious. So you need to say to him to stop doing what you're doing. It's kind of a disciplinary phrase. And I'll just say it real quickly, because what's going to be funny is what happens later. The phrase is Bo Yar Tsar Yang. I never forget it. Well, apparently I was saying it a whole lot the time that we were together. So one day, we're in the second week, and he was jumping up and down on the bed, as little 4-year-olds would. And I said, Shen, Boyarts are young. He jumps off the bed, starts walking to me with a swagger like this. Boyarts are young. He's making fun of me. And I just started laughing. I love this kid already.
How did fatherhood reshape your purpose?
Oh my gosh. Flipped it upside down. Because now he's dependent on me. And I loved that. It changed everything about me to have a young human dependent on me.
It changed your emotional landscape, everything.
It changed me 1,000%.
How were those first few months?
Hard, really hard for everybody. I mean, it was a culture shock. He didn't know us. We didn't know him. Poor little guy. I mean, we took him from everything he knew was safe. But now he's a very healthy, emotionally strong young man. He's 21 years old now. He's get his double major in college, and he's doing great. He's living his best life.
Does he play tennis?
No, I told him if he wanted to play tennis, that I would hire a good coach to teach him. I was going to be his dad. I was not going to be his tennis teacher. So for every parent that's out there, that's my lesson. What he does, though, takes up karate. And you ready for this? Wins a national championship at age 14 in karate. In the AAU 14 and under, Team Kumite, which is tag team fighting. And he and his two best friends, and they win the national championship in Fort Lauderdale. Pretty cool.
And nothing like tennis.
Nope.
What inspired you to climb the tallest mountain in Africa?
What started the whole inspiration was Dad. When I was 20 years old, I get this phone call in the spring. I'm a junior at Illinois, and I'm on the tennis team. And Dad says, tell your tennis coach that you're not going to be playing a whole lot of tournaments this year. And I said, why? Remember, we're estranged. We have this really rocky relationship. He says, because you and I are going to drive to Alaska. I went, what? What are you talking about? And he tells me, I want to go, and I think you and I should do this together. I'm going, just you and me? He goes, yeah. And I'm going, how long are we going to be gone? I mean, I'm doing all this pushback. He says, about 6 weeks. And I'm going, Dad, we'll kill each other. And I said that to him, and he says, I don't know. I don't think so. And I'm going, Dad, really? Yeah. Okay. So we did that. And it was tough. It was a very tough trip for a lot of reasons. But that was the beginning of my dad and I at least having the ability to confront each other and talk, which led to the reconciliation moment about 15 years later. And it was that trip to Alaska when I adopted my son. I said, I want to do something with Shen that's significant like Alaska was for my dad and I. I've always had an affinity for Africa, so his mom and I were not together. And I called her and I said, what do you think about this? And she had a ton of questions, obviously. I would have too. And I assured her with everything that at all costs, he would be safe. We would do it with the company that I was with. And if something even happened to me, we would have plans to get him back to her. And she said, okay, but this is like a year and a half before I'm going to do it. So he's only 11 years old. But I took him to Rocky Mountain National Park. I didn't know how he would handle altitude. First of all, you don't know how anybody's going to handle altitude. But I wanted to go to Rocky Mountain because if he could handle that, then we at least could talk about it. If he couldn't handle that, we couldn't go to Kilimanjaro. He did great. And at the end of the trip, I said, do you want to go higher? And he says, how much higher? I said, maybe a mile vertical. He goes, in the United States, Dad? I go, no, Africa. And he goes, yeah. Now we start training. We make the commitment. We're going to do it. In the summer of 2017, we were on the mountain for 8 days, and you can see the picture behind me. We made it to the summit.
How did you train to do that?
Aerobically, he trained with all of his karate. He did a lot of fighting. And I trained with tennis. I played 3 to 4 times a week aerobically. And then we did hiking specific training with poles and with backpacks to get accustomed to that. The one thing you could never train for was the altitude. The week before we went to Kilimanjaro, we went back to Rocky Mountain to train at 12, 14,000. But the funny part is the Kilimanjaro is a mile higher than those. The beauty of climbing Kilimanjaro was the adventure that you really never knew how you were going to respond to altitude. You didn't know if you'd make it or not. It was like, let's just keep putting one foot in front of the other because it's hard. We're going to do this together. We prepared mentally because the worst thing for me would have been that he would have felt that he couldn't have let me down. So we did a lot of mental preparation on the fact that if we don't make it, we don't make it. That doesn't mean we weren't successful. If one of us goes down because of the age difference and him being a minor, both of us have to go down. So we really mentally prepared for that. We talked about the difference between you're really sick or it's time to suck it up, Buttercup. We had all these conversations. I mean, I coached my butt off with that kid on that trip.
It was growing for you, but for him, that must have been emotionally growing for him as well.
Well, I think you start talking about at what point does a child become a man. I think that was his initiation of becoming a man, even though he was only 12 years old. 2 years later, he wins a national championship in karate. I think it just all sets the stage for who he has become. But yeah, I think that trip was a big, big step for him.
What did reaching that summit mean for you personally?
When I was up there, it was really the funniest thing in the world. You only can stay there 15 minutes. You go up so quickly. We summited on the 6th night. They don't want you to stay there very long. You stay there long enough, get your picture taken, and then you're going down. So 15 minutes is about it. So I'm up there, and I'm just looking around. But after that, I'm just reflecting. I'm by myself. Shen had already started going down. And I'm reflecting. I'm going, well, we did it, but it's just another little brick in the building that is me. I'm very proud of it, and I'm very honored that I was able to do it with my son, and I'll never forget it. I'm sure he'll never forget it, but it's just another brick. It's the whole story that weaves the tapestry of who we are.
One brick doesn't define you, but all of them together.
None of this defines me individually, but it's the whole story, and that's why I wrote the book.
What mountain are you climbing right now?
Right now, it's more of a personal mountain. I'm taking really, really good care of myself. I've got friends. I follow both the tennis teams at the university that's close to me. So the mountains I'm climbing right now are more fun mountains. It's so funny. Everybody says, how are your knees holding up? I said, they're the only thing that doesn't hurt because they're metal. I don't have knees, but it is what it is.
As you were writing, what chapter gave you the greatest challenge?
They're all challenging for different reasons. Probably the last, as we get toward the end, when my parents die, were probably the most difficult. Because when Mom died, for the next 3 years before Dad passed away, I was his caregiver. So this whole mountain had shifted now. We had reconciled to the point that, and my dad, unfortunately, had become alcoholic. And now he's even in a nursing home. There's just a certain irony in all that.
Was there anything that you debated on leaving out of the book that you chose to keep?
The one thing that I didn't really debate, a lot of people might say they would have liked to have heard more about the dynamics in my marriages, but it wasn't about throwing anybody under the bus. I never lay blame to anybody else. This is my story. It's not a blaming story. A lot of people would say, why didn't you tell more about this story? Because it really doesn't add to my story. I think sometimes we blame other things and other events instead of owning our stuff. And I own everything, the good and the bad. And it's that part, I think, that is going to be helpful for people is let's take ownership in who we are and what we do. It's not the words we say, it's our behaviors.
When you were writing your memoir, inevitably you evaluate your life in ways you may not have expected. As you were writing it, what did you learn about yourself that genuinely surprised you?
I don't know if I ever would have evaluated the quality of human being that I was growing to become. I think I sort of just took it for granted that I was an okay guy. I was a good person, but it was a combination of the adoption and then recommitting to my faith that helped me realize the quality of person that I can be to others. Self-love is key, but the quality of person that I can be to other people, not just being this person who teaches other people and gives all this information, this leader in this whole sports science field, but a quality person who can give energy and love to another human being. Unconditional love. I think that's the future, is agape love. I've spent my whole life and my career dealing with the idea of purpose, but I think it's more than purpose that I've learned. It's agape love toward other people. And I didn't see that earlier in my life at all. I believe that the growth in my life has allowed me to love and to understand unconditional love, agape love.
How did your faith play into who you are today, and how long did that take for you to get there?
The faith piece happened when I was in that hospital situation in 96, when I felt abandoned. Mom had always taken me to church as a little boy. I said to myself, I really want to understand faith. And I read 2 books. Remember, I'm a scientist. So I said, it's not going to get in my heart unless I get it in my brain. So I got to get it in my brain first. So I read one book called The Science of God, and I read another book called The Evidence for God. They were written by theoretical physicists. One of them was an atheist when the book was written. But in The Science of God, they give this statistic. I'm going to kind of butcher it off the top of my head. This was the wake-up call. This is okay, that it's time to really start getting deeper into this. It said that the possibility of going from a Big Bang theory like a spark, to an organized behavioral biological being like humans is 10 to like the minus 29th power of impossibility. It's absolutely impossible without creative genius behind it. And I just said, okay. And then I read Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. And it was then I got involved with a church in Orlando and I recommitted my faith. I got baptized in 1999. David Lovelace was the senior pastor and he mentored me. It was one of those situations. Why would he invite me to be part of his men's leadership group? I mean, I'm this newbie now, but he invites me to be a part of it. And these are men that had been deep in their faith for a long period of time, but they all accepted me. And I grew with them very quickly. When I decide I want to learn something, I'm a sponge. And then it got in my heart and I got baptized in 99.
And it's been great ever since.
Oh, ever since. Unbelievable. Helped me with the adoption. The morning I left to go get Shen by myself, I got in the car. I said, here, but by the grace of God, go I. Because I got no idea what I'm doing. And that first night, poor kid, he was terrified. He was crying. He's on the edge of the bed, and I'm sitting in there. I said, God, what do you want me to do? Because I've got nothing. And the translator had told me, don't give him a bath, whatever you do, because he was dirty. And I said, why? And he says, it'll push him further away. It's too intimate. And I said, God, what do you want me to do? And I felt in my heart, give him a bath. And I actually said out loud in English, he doesn't understand English. I go, I'm going to ask you one more time. And I felt, give him a bath. So I said, all right, I'm going to give him a bath. So I take him and he starts really screaming now. So I make a conscious choice. I'm not going to wash his hair, no soap in the eyes, no private parts. I just washed his feet and his shoulders. Get him out, put him in a pair of pajamas that I brought, give him a sippy cup of apple juice, not another tear, and he slept right next to me the entire night. And that was an answer to prayer. I did exactly what I was told not to do by humans.
What do you want readers to understand about the difference in living for achievement and living with meaning?
Achievement means nothing if there's not meaning attached to it. I've got to be careful saying that, because do I say that all the achievements that I've had no meaning? That's not true. But they would have been much more significant if I would have had other people. When I received the Distinguished Alumni Award at the University of Illinois this past fall, my son was there. My stepson was there. We videotaped it for my sister to watch the video. It was an achievement, but I was with other people. It wasn't when I go to the Olympic Scientific Congress in 1976 and I'm giving 2 scientific papers and I'm by myself and look what I did. I'm taking others along with me now. And I can mentor and I can lead and I can teach and I can love. I'm taking others on the path with me. So yeah, I'm still getting recognition, but others are enjoying it with me now. Not for me to show off, for them to understand this is for them too.
Like you, many of us have had childhood wounds. What do you hope that they hear between the lines of your book?
Make sure you process through this, because I'm a big believer in counseling and therapy. Make sure you reconcile the childhood wounds in your own heart. Like, if I hadn't reconciled and my dad would have passed away, that would be hard for me. I don't think people have to force it like I had to. If I'd gone through therapy a little earlier and understood what was happening, and maybe I could have understood how to talk to my dad instead of just the confrontational yelling, because it was bad. On the Alaska trip when I was 20, he was railing on me one day and I'm driving. So we're on the edge of a mountain And I honestly think he thought I was going to drive us off the edge of the mountain. That was the first time I ever stood up to him. By the way, the chapter in my book ends with a quote from an anonymous source, and it says, "If standing up for yourself means that you burn bridges, I have matches. We ride at dawn."
What story in the book still takes your breath away?
My adoption, just the whole me being by myself at my age, and in the civil affairs office in Guangzhou, China, they bring a 4-year-old out screaming that he's being kidnapped. And then in a period of 2 weeks, just become like this bond you can't imagine. That story, you just can't make that up.
And now your relationship with him is...
Oh, so strong.
What do you hope outlives your story?
You know, that is a hard question. What do I want my legacy? I want the book and my son's story to live beyond me. At the end of the day, he grows up to be a contributing member to society, and the impact that I had in his life, that's what I want to be remembered for.